Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with John Wright, Executive Vice President of Maru Public Opinion. John, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Diane.
We're talking about the inaugural Forbes-Maru Public Opinion poll, and this is on the economy. Give me some context around this in terms of who you spoke to and some of the top line findings.
Yeah, we have been tracking U.S. opinion now on the economy since about January of 2020. So we've had a good stretch on about 16 questions where we take a look at every dynamic. So it's not just the economy, but pocketbooks. For this one, and every month, we track 1,500 independent new Americans. And this one was last done about a month ago.
So one thing that I find intriguing in looking at the results is technically the economy is fairly robust in terms of the job numbers. You know, inflation seems to be getting somewhat under control, but yet Americans seem very pessimistic. So why is that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. And we have to think that there was last month a really big slide in our numbers, but it's kind of one and done. And that was the whole debate over the debt ceiling. Americans were tuned into that. There was a sense of calamity if something happened. But now we're back on another course. So two things are important. Number one is we've actually come up in optimism, if you can believe it, from the numbers that you're seeing here, up in optimism over the last 3 months or so. So there's been a bit of a trend line up. But the most important thing that's driving the negative outlook at the moment is lack of savings. And we've seen obviously inflation eating away at pocketbooks. We've seen individuals who are contrasted against a very robust job market. And the second thing within that is interest rates. I mean, a lot of people are renewing mortgages. Those variable interest rates in the credit cards have had a pinch on the pocketbook. And that's where we are. What's driving it primarily is lack of savings because it's been drawn down since about December.
So can you give us the numbers when you say lack of savings? So technically, are most Americans worse off, like when they report on that pocketbook part of the equation? What do they say?
Well, the first thing is that we've got roughly, just a slight majority of people who don't see the economy on the right track. And that's been in effect now, as I said, for a number of months, but it's improving a little bit.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is that there's a bit of a pessimistic outlook in terms of whether they're going to see the national economy improve or even their own local economy. It's just not there. It tends to split demographically, though, and that's where you get this contrast where you're having, of course, the people at the upper end of the income are feeling pretty good. I mean, in fact, they feel like they're better off than they were 4 years ago or even last year. But the people at the lower end who tend to be younger and tend to be in the lower income, in fact, are looking pretty pessimistic. So on the pocketbook side, they're drawing down on their savings. They don't have as much expenditure, but you can clearly see that there is a split in terms of who has money and who doesn't, who's younger versus who's older. And that, in fact, the only place where the older folks fit into it is obviously on fixed income. But that's where you're seeing the bulk of this, where whatever was existing in December as we went into the holidays with the savings and were used up then, in fact, has become a lot tighter now. And the outlook for spending and concern about the economy has grown.
So let's stick with the demographics a moment because it feels like every year is an election year. But this year in particular, of course, we're all thinking red state, blue state.
Yeah.
Any interesting divisions along those lines?
Well, I mean, it's interesting from the point of view that there is a bit of a middle ground here. You're going to obviously have Republicans and Democrats to the majority thinking quite opposite. Republicans, in fact, are far more pessimistic on where the economy is going than the Democrats are. But there's an opening space here for about a third of both voters who are somewhat in the middle here. I think when you contrast it over results going back over the last year or so, we've had Democrats now starting to bleed into that area where there's a little bit more pessimism than there was previously. It's not that it's opening up a big gap right here, but the Republicans certainly are growing with some others from the Democrat side, and particularly with independents who are more pessimistic about the outlook than they were before.
So, John, I'm curious because we are in this election season, so much attention's being played to the culture wars. Do you think the economy is going to be a more important issue than we might have assumed?
I think at this stage, Diane, and mainly because, of course, the Fed has been looking at raising interest rates, and it's having an effect on a lot of people. And secondly, that's despite a very robust job market. But I think inflation hasn't been wrestled down yet as much as it should be. And we've got a long runway until 2024, where we're into the heights of the political season. So at the moment, it's playing into the ethos of the American public. I mean, pocketbooks are pocketbooks. It tends to be where there's more wedge issues on, abortion and civil rights and other issues like that. So this is the tapestry of the background. It's resonant and it's starting to pinch, but it could improve over the next number of months. I mean, the big issue here is whether or not the United States falls into a recession. And the Fed has got to be really careful, of course, in terms of how they raise interest rates, which may be in the offing because of that inflation. And if that's the case, then it does play more into this issue, and particularly in certain states that are going to be affected the most by that. But right now, I think it's still in the background. Again, as I said, it's improving, but it's not improving enough. And you can really see the political divide here.
It's interesting because, as you know, the Fed has made noises about future rate hikes, and it does not make these decisions based on public opinion. But how do you sort of view that in light of what you're seeing in these polls right now? Are they likely to make another hike?
Well, I think that there's obviously room for a hike to be made because you have to take it more in a global sense. Canada has come out with lower inflation numbers today. So in watching that part of the world, they've already seen it drop from 4.3 to about 3.4 in the last month alone. You're seeing it in England, however, where it's remaining high, and the Bank of England's going to have to increase rates as they already have, and it's really putting a squeeze on people. The United States tends to be somewhere in between, where the Fed keeps looking at the marketplace. And we know that July is a really important month in North America because both Canada and the United States are going to be having a projection of where they will probably go over the next year, and the markets will watch that very, very carefully. So all to say that from a banking point of view, from a central bank point of view, they're still dealing with trying to bring the inflation down. If you ask consumers right now and Americans overall whether they fear that there's a recession on the way, you're going to get a majority saying it is.
Yeah.
Ironically, they may say that, but there's no direct evidence of it. If you get down to brass tacks on this, 1 in 5, 21% of Americans actually believe there is a recession affecting them right now. It's very demographically oriented and really across the country.
Yeah.
So there's this anxiousness that it could happen, but it's not here yet. So that's what they're playing with. It's an interesting thing that's going to have to be gauged very carefully because it's either going to be soft landing or a hard landing. And most Americans at the moment think if it does happen, it's probably going to be harder than it is softer.
Very pessimistic. In terms of the outlook, what else is on your radar from this poll or otherwise that you would put on ours in terms of what to look for going ahead?
Well, I think the overall anxiety level, again, it ties into what I've just talked about.
Yeah.
The Fed, interest rates, inflation, and to take a look and see whether or not, with the pulling in of people's horns, consumers pulling back, if we start to see retail move in a direction where there's shortages, whether there's lack of spending in certain areas, well, then that's going to produce a bit of a cascade effect. I mean, you clearly are going to have people with companies with more inventory. Prices will fall, which obviously is advantageous. But as I said, consumers, in fact, are finding that their pocketbooks are lighter nowadays, and so there isn't as much spending. I think the thing that comes through the most in this poll versus the other ones that we've done over the last many months is the spike in concern about job loss. We have now jumped almost 9 points in the last month, where Americans believe that there is a sense of impending job loss to a much greater group of people. And again, this comes from that echo of potentially a recession coming and seeing something in their own neighborhood. So I'd say if anything has come about in the last number of months, that's the one thing that's showing up the most, the greater anxiety about job loss.
Yeah, very interesting to watch, and curious what other factors may be playing into that. John, thank you very much. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks so much, Diane.